Paul Kent, welcome to the Buy Round. Really pleased to have you on. You're someone who I've got to know over the past decade really well, a person who I admire for his integrity, his honesty. You stand for something and not fall for everything. You do, I guess you divide opinions on you as a personality, but as I've got to know you, I feel I know where you're coming from, and it's a place of passion for the game. You're not just out there to criticize or put people down because you've got nothing better to do. It's my belief that you care about the game and you want to see it go to a better place, and part of that means calling out mismanagement, irresponsibility, players messing up, etc., etc. You've got the greater good of the game at heart. Would that be a fair assessment?
100%. I played the game as a kid. Loved the game as a kid. Always wanted to be around the game and involved in the game. And obviously I've ended up down this track where I'm at now. But the game is not 2020 when it comes to making decisions. And there's been a massive upheaval in the last, I'd say 15 years with just the way the game has been managed. We went down a route where everybody was talking about we need more business brains on boards, and a lot of the football intellect went out of the game. But I think the smart ones have certainly arrived at the place now where you don't need more business people and you don't need more football people. You need more people who know the business of football. And there's not a lot of those people. And I've been covering the game for 30 years now, and I think part of the trick of being around the game is knowing who's who in the zoo. And a lot of these new people on boards and running administrations don't know that, and that's why they continue to make the mistakes that they make. So, yeah, I love the game. I want to see it get better, and I want to see it get bigger, and I think rugby league should be really open in its stance that it wants to be the number one football code in Australia. I don't think it should strive for a place in the same neighbourhood with the other football codes. I think it should just go out and with the sole goal of obliterating them.
Do you think Peter V'landys is the right man in charge then?
Yeah. 100%. Look, Peter's a rugby league man, and he's ruthless. Yeah. He makes decisions. He doesn't care about the criticisms around those decisions. He just makes the decisions that he believes is good for the game. I wouldn't say, again, not every decision he's made he's been spot on, but compared to what we've had and how well he is going, he's doing a magnificent job.
Yeah, I like the fact he gets things done and he doesn't deliberate too much. He's the leader. Some may argue it's a dictatorship, but I think it's one that, for the greater good of the game, it seems to be working so far. He's not having meetings and getting everybody's thoughts in. COVID crisis was a great example of that. He was like, right, everybody, I want to go forward. Come with me, and we'll get through it.
Well, the unknown story, I think, Jimmy, I'll tell you about the COVID crisis, and this is where Peter doesn't get enough credit for, is he came out and he went down, he sat down, he looked at the NRL's books and he said, right, we've got to go, we've got to shut down now. He admits now that the day he shut down, if he'd gone one more day, he would not have shut down the competition. The game would have continued. But on that day, was the day they actually announced they were shutting down, was the worst COVID figures that we saw. So it just was a bit of a perfect storm there. But what he ended up doing, though, he sat down and looked at the books. And what very few people know is that there was a secret agreement there between the NRL and AFL about going down, shutting down the competition of both codes for the bigger purpose, about getting the country back together. And let's not use this as part of the, let's not politicise it, let's not use it as part of the war between the codes. Let's, for the good of the country, we'll go out together and we'll come back together. What people don't know is that when V'landys sat down and looked at the books, the NRL didn't have enough money to come back in September as the NRL and the AFL had agreed to do. They were not going to be able to survive. There would have been clubs that fell by the wayside by the time they came back in September. So V'landys looked at the figures, and he understands figures better than anybody, and thought, we can't survive this. Now, what people don't realise is the AFL had a $600 million loan that they put up against Marvel Stadium.
Because they own
Marvel Stadium, which is worth $1 billion. So they got a $600 million guarantor from the banks that if they needed that money, it was there for them. The NRL couldn't get a $30 million loan. The banks didn't want to touch them. So the NRL sat back and said, well, okay. Then they agreed to go out and come back in September. V'landys come out and said, we ain't doing that. You're back May 28. Now, what he did is he put together Project Apollo. They went away and they started to work on it. They went and had their meetings, and typically, as it happens in the game, the coaches got involved and said, look, we're going to need a 5-week lead-in to get the players ready. So when Project Apollo had finished and V'landys said, go and work it out, figure out how you're going to get back by May 28. They went away and they came back and they said, mate, we've done it all, it's ready to go, we've got all our protocols in place, but we're coming back in July. V'landys said, no, you're not. And they said, yes, we are. He said, you're not. I'm telling you now, you're not. Oh, well, we just were spoken. He said, I don't care about the coaches. You're not coming back. You're coming back May 28. He said, get back on the phone. V'landys then rang every person on Project Apollo. He said, I don't care what you decided in that meeting, you're coming back May 28. He said, that's the reality. He said, so you figure out now how you get back by May 28. And as you know out of that, that forced the AFL to come back and rush their plans to come back. They didn't get back quite by May 28. They came back a few weeks later. But the game, we could be playing now with an 8-team competition. I don't know what the numbers are as far as clubs. We could be, a lot of clubs were about to go to the wall if they'd stayed suspended until September. And V'landys saved the game on that. And people don't know that because a lot of it was done in confidentiality.
Yeah.
But that's how important his decision making was. I'm
just thinking back to that time as an active player when I was playing at the Dragons, and you saw we all witnessed the news of, we were sort of blindsided as a playing group. We're coming back on May 28th, and it was like, the RLPA representatives ringing us up saying, hey, don't talk about this because we've not actually agreed anything in play. But now I'm on the other side of it. I kind of admire like the deadline.
Yeah.
Putting a deadline, and I spoke to other people about this, having a finish line in sight.
Yeah.
It makes you work towards something rather than we'll come back when it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
It's like, no. This is the date, and whatever we've got to do, we get it done. You can work back from that timeline. Sometimes you're going to be ahead, sometimes you're going to be behind, but May 28th.
Yeah, and for the first time, and I don't say this a lot, but for in that period, the players' welfare really had to take second place to the welfare of the game as a whole. I understand how vital it is for player welfare, and I think the game does a great job of putting their welfare ahead of everything other decision that gets made. But in this case, for the sake of the entire game, it needed to happen on that May 28 date, and that's what V'landys does. Though he understood the finances of it, he understood the reality of it, and he refused to let anybody talk him out of it, and he's done that with countless times. And I think that's why he's just such a great leader of the game. He's the best administrator of sport in Australia by a mile.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's important to remember we did come back, and then we had to relocate as well. I wasn't part of that relocation, but the logistics side of that for the turnaround was incredibly quick. When you look back,
it was really quick, and again, it was a big decision that had to be made, and there's a lot of criticism of it about the player welfare again and moving away from home and how tough that was on everybody. The interesting thing was the first season when everybody had to move away and the other codes all moved away, all the premierships were won by the teams that had been relocated. So some of the teams that, even though they were staying in the bubble in their own area, the teams that relocated that year, Richmond won it, they were relocated on the Gold Coast, I think it was. The Storm won it, they were up on the Sunshine Coast. Even in netball, they were relocated to Queensland. So for all the negatives everybody said about relocation, it actually, I think, there were some benefits to the team bonding, the team spirit and the cohesion in the team, that they're all living in apartment buildings together, all hotels together.
Yeah, well, I guess you go back to administration, the teams that managed that relocation well and saw the positive side to it and how to get the best out of them despite the home comforts being taken away, they excelled, where the ones that didn't, and it became a negative environment, and if I was home, and look for excuses. I think it showed in their performances.
And the Storm had a rule that they weren't allowed to whinge about being away, that at certain nights they had to get together and do things together, but there are also other nights that you had your own space. There were rules in place where for example, the coach was not allowed after a certain time to go and knock on a door, even though it was convenient now because he's just up the hallway,
Yeah.
and you know what the temptation of coaches are like. There are other coaches who couldn't help themselves. They were sitting there at 10 o'clock at night, just calling a bloke, 3 rooms up, mate, come down and have a look at this. I've just found the video. But they got footballed out.
Yeah.
But the Storm had a very clear line there about when they were working and when they were just having leisure time, and they stuck to that. So the players were able to relax in their downtime.
Yeah, that was really important. I feel like really important. But I want to take you back a little bit. Can you tell us how you got into sports journalism?
Yeah, look, well, as I said, I played footy as a kid and just loved the game. And for me, the journalism road began when Steve Crawley, who's now ironically my boss at Fox Sports, he began to coach me when I was 15. And he was already a journalist, sports writer at the Sun, which is now a newspaper that's dead. But I started reading his stories, and I just saw a world that wasn't sort of possible where I grew up. Where I grew up, most people left school and became tradies. They were electricians, plumbers, that sort of thing. And I just saw this way to be able to be involved in sport, and I didn't know if I could write or anything, but I just thought it was a way to be involved in it. And from that, I left school. I got a cadetship at a newspaper, the local newspaper. Essentially, began the Parramatta Advertiser. Now, at the same time, though, I was playing footy. As you know, I'm not a very good player. I'm quite clear about that. But I still had the dream back then. I was playing at Parramatta, working at the Parramatta Advertiser. And then I went and had a couple of years at North Sydney. And at those periods I was playing, I was also a cadet journalist. So the footy didn't open the door for me to become a journalist. I already started that. And it just had a big impact on my life. And I was already within the club environment looking at how players reacted to the media and how they dealt with the media. Much different now than was back then. But that was part of it. And I came along, mate, at a time where I could feel myself even in my footy career progressing more and more towards the journalism. I remember that my last year at North was presentation night. I was sitting there, and Peter Jackson, one of the great fellas, sadly no longer with us, but Jacko came over and had a chat with me. He said, "What are you doing next year?" And I said, "Mate," North had offered me another year, another contract, and I said, "Mate, I think I might just give it away and just concentrate on the journalism." And he just said to me, he goes, "Right." He said, "Look," he said, "Mate, I've got to have a smoke." And I said, "Well, right." And back in these days, you could just smoke in clubs, you know. So it was presentation night, and he goes, "No, I can't have it here." He said, "Let's go outside." So I thought, he doesn't want the fans seeing him smoke. So we went outside and we walked around a couple of bars. He said, "I can't have it here." So we kept walking around. I'm like, "Just light up." Anyway, we finally get to the car park, and he opens the door, and we're in the car park, and he says, "Somewhere here that's quiet." I said, "Well, mate, my car's just there." So he got in my car, and I realised then what was going on. He pulled out this joint, right? It was dead set that long. It was as thick as my thumb, right? And it was massive. And I just looked at it. So he's just lit up this joint in my car, and he starts chuffing on it. And we start talking about my career, and he's trying to convince me to keep playing. The car started filling up with smoke. I thought, if anybody comes out of the car park, we're just cooked here. There's no way you can hide. It's like old Cheech and Chong movies where there's just like this white cloud inside a car. So it was like that. And he just sat there smoking, and he was trying to encourage me to keep playing. But by then I'd already made up my mind. And so I said no to the Bears, and I got a job a little while later at the Sydney newspaper writing about rugby league, and it's been going on since then. So that's how it started.
Yeah, so it's, what is it, 30?
I think this is my 30th season.
30th season. Well, yeah. I think, it's safe to say we all change over time.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the journalist you were compared to the journalist you are now?
Yeah, look, well, because I think I was so in love with the game back then, I was very much in America they call it two forms of journalism. They call them the R-nuts version, which is the bloke saying, "Oh, this is terrible, this is shit out," and the gee whiz, which is how good's this and how. And I was very much a gee whiz journalist. Everybody I wrote back then was, if you read the story, they were 10% better than they actually were. You know what I mean? And I love that fact. And I used to be able to sit down there, and if I wanted to write a story about someone, I'd ring his coach, and I'd ring the player, and then I'd ring 3 or 4 of his teammates, and I'd just you get this picture of the player, and they're all happy to talk to you and all the rest of it back then. But times have changed. The media's certainly changed with the internet age, which has changed a lot of the world. And I've got older. I see the world differently now, and so how I write and what I write about has certainly changed. I couldn't write a story now that I used to be able to write back then. You just don't get the access to the players, so you've got to find other ways around that. At the same time, I've changed. I've seen, I've experienced things in the world where I used to see footballers and they were much bigger than what they actually were. I now understand, to your point about rugby league being a made-up game with made-up rules. That's what it is, Jimmy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I went to about 17, 18 years ago now when Operation Freedom was on. I went to Iraq when the war was on. I wasn't there a long time, but I went over there, and I remember one night we were at the camp. I think it was Camp David inside Baghdad. And at that point, Baghdad was still a dangerous place, and all the camps where the American and Australian and British soldiers and everybody were there were all basically, they were like little fortresses, little castles, and they were heavily guarded. You couldn't get in, and it was a dangerous place. I remember there one night, a couple of things. One night we were there, and patrols had all come back in. And these kids got out of their little ASLO vehicles that they were travelling in, 18, 19, 20 years old. And there was like a drum, I'd say like a 10-gallon drum, and it was probably about this long, about sort of circumference like that, and there's a hole cut in it, and it was filled with sand up to where the hole was. And the soldiers had to get out, discharge their weapons because they're now inside the safety of the camp, discharge their weapons, and just to make sure there's nothing left in the chamber, they had to point the gun into the barrel and fire the bullet, fire the trigger. And it was a standard thing. Every night they come in, click, 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 and then one night it went boom. One of the young soldiers had forgotten to clear the chamber that was in the round that was in the chamber, and he got reprimanded for and got put on KP duty. And I remember at the time the reaction to him doing that simple mistake, and how the senior officers that were there really jumped on him about how he's there responsible for the welfare of everybody else as well. And his carelessness could have ended in a fatality. And we've seen that has happened over there. And so this kid was 19, 20, very embarrassed about what had happened. The senior officers who jumped on him, 27, 28, but really laid down the law to him. So then I came back from that experience, and I'm watching how 25, 26, 27, 28-year-old men are behaving. But not only that, how everybody within the game quickly circles around them. Mate, you don't know, lay off, he's only 27 years old. And I think to myself, there's two different worlds being lived here. There's like the indulgence of the NRL player and how well they are looked after and protected, but not really made accountable, which is why these mistakes keep happening again. Whereas, as opposed to these soldiers, and they were young. One night we went up, and one of the young kids, I'll call him a kid, he was 18, 19 again, and we went up, and it was his turn to pull duty in the tower, and he had to sit up there, and he had to write down every bomb that goes off around the city and where it is according to direction and roughly how far and all the rest of it is. He said to me, "You want to come up and we'll have a chat?" And I said, "Yeah, right." So we sat up there. And so we're talking. Bomb goes off. Big black smoke comes up. And he just sits there and he keeps talking to me. And I thought, he hasn't even noticed this. Anyway, then another one goes off about 15 minutes later. And you'd be frightened at how often these bombs were going off around the city. Like just car bombs that people are driving into things. Anyway, they're going off. And after about the third or fourth bomb, I said, "Mate, you're going to write this down?" Because I thought he's just missed it. Yeah. Like, he's too busy having a chat, you know. But he said, "Oh no," he said, you only log them if the ground shakes." So that's how close they had to be that the ground had to shake. And so, and again, it's just like there's countless stories of that, Jimmy, where, and they're going out to fight for the country. They're 19 years old, and the responsibility put on. We went out on patrol one night, and the captain that sat down and basically took them through the route on the map that we were going to go and all the rest of it, and what the dangers were and how they'd had intelligence that there was a group here and there's a group there and that we need to be looking out for this and all the rest of it. He would have been 28. Wouldn't have been any older. And I just remember looking at him thinking, mate, what a man this guy is. Like he had a maturity I'd never seen in another guy at that age, and the way he spoke to his players, it was like Cameron Smith at the end of his career talking to his players. It's like a Jack Gibson presence. You know, he sat there and he basically laid down the law of what he expected from them that night. And there's no smart asses, no taking the piss in. They knew that they were there. They knew what the consequences were if they got it wrong. So then when I go back to cover footy and a bloke carries on a certain way, or even on the field in certain ways, and loses discipline completely, and there's this rush to circle around him, so, mate, you guys don't know. Because I get, in the rugby league world, as a journalist, I'm this big. I get that. That's how players see us. They don't realise that in the world, they're that big. But that's fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Perspective.
It's all perspective, mate. Yeah. And so I've got a perspective as I've got older that's different from a 25-year-old footballer. And I don't apologise for that. It just is. And when it comes to fans, I've got a different perspective than fans. I don't sit there. I don't own a dog. But if I did, it wouldn't get a kick if a certain team lost. You know what I mean? Whereas some fans, it makes their whole week miserable. And I love the fact that it does.
Yeah.
But it's just, I just don't see the game that way anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that perspective side of things is important. And I think you speak as a very matured person now, and you've had those experiences. And I think, a lot of young NRL players get, not to make excuses for them, but they get fast forward through life into fame, and they don't know how to deal with it. And possibly that could be another area that the NRL need to explore instead of some of these education workshops. I've sat through some of them. I mean, yeah, they seemed like box ticking exercises.
So I think they are. Look, it'll never be fixed properly until the coaches buy in. So the problem with players in this respect, they go to school, they leave school and they go straight into a club environment. Very few get jobs now.
Yeah.
They're already on scholarships at school. They go into, once they get into that top 30, they're earning, what's the minimum wage now? About
120.
120. So that, which is good money. And they go from school into the club environment. And the vital thing that never gets spoken about that needs to be fixed is coaches want them kept in a state of permanent adolescence. They don't want to develop man. Despite all their talk about them wanting to develop the man, they don't want to do that. And because a man at 25 or 26 might question the coach's methods, or he might question a teammate's commitment or a teammate's behaviour, which causes a fracture within the playing group. So coaches like to keep them in that space. They like to make them distrustful of the media. Don't talk to them. You can't trust them, because that stops stuff getting out. But what happens is, over time, these guys, and you can't tell them when they're 22, 23, and sometimes 26, 27, you still can't tell them. But when they get to 29, 30, and suddenly the end is in sight, and they're sitting there thinking, what am I going to do the rest of my life? I've got 35 years of work left ahead of me. And they haven't grown up enough to work in that world.
Well, a classic example of this is anytime we go and play the Warriors away from home, over in Auckland, bring your passports on Monday. We need your passports, because we weren't given the trust to rock up to the airport with the passport ourselves, just in case somebody left it at home.
Yeah.
Now, I can understand why they want to be prepared. Hey, we can't afford anyone to miss this flight. But how about giving the responsibility to the players? There's a level of importance. You've got to pack your polo shirt, your boots, your mouth guard, all those different things. But we're going to New Zealand. Bring your passport. And if you don't, you're going to have to sit this one out, and you're going to cost the team.
Yeah.
But and there's a life lesson. And hey, make sure you got 6 months on it as well, because if you don't have 6 months on your passport, You ain't coming to New Zealand.
I'll tell you the flip side of that. I spoke to someone at a club one day who got a phone call. Mate, I've got a problem. What's that? Mate, I'm taking the family away on holidays. I'm at the airport and my passport's expired. And the club was like, well, what do you want us to do? He said, well, can you get it fixed? He said, I've got to get on the plane. I said, mate, you can't get a new passport in 3 hours, mate. It just doesn't happen that way. So he was like, well, what am I going to do? They said, well, mate, why didn't you get it fixed? He hadn't played at the club for 3 years. He'd been retired 3 years, and he still hadn't figured out that. Like what sort of man takes his family away on holidays because he's grown up his whole life with clubs saying passport here on Monday?
They'd probably renew it for him as well.
Yeah, and he turned up with his for a family holiday. Passport was expired, not even 6 months left, expired. But his first point of call was to ring the club he hadn't played with for 3 years to say, "Can you help me?"
You know what, mate? I'm not surprised. I've thought about this quite a lot, and even what most people take for granted in terms of like booking a doctor's appointment. Yeah. Something as a footballer I've never had to do.
Yeah.
I've never had to arrange a scan. I've never had to have a consultation really with a, it's all been,
be here at 10 o'clock.
Go to place X at this time and you basically go in and
they'll look after you.
Taken care of, which again, I understand there's an urgency around dealing with injury, but there's no responsibility. And then when you exit the game, unless you're involved with a club, there's anxiety around booking medical services, booking a doctor's appointment, and it's I've got to wait 2 months.
Yeah,
what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's an unfortunate, sad reality.
Yeah.
Which,
it's a real concern for the game because there's two things that players come out of the game with. One is that anxiety that I've now got to do all this myself. Okay, I've got to push on. I've got to make my own decisions, and I've got to get up on Monday morning as a self-starter now and work for that week.
Yeah.
And the other part is that they come out of it and there's a real void there for that adrenaline rush and that combat and that ability to go out and dominate a rival and play and get that aggression out and have that outlet. And some of them struggle with that, the fact that they can't just go and run into a bloke and let all that aggression out. And between the pair of them, that causes a lot of problems for former players. And we've seen countless episodes of that in recent years, and it's been going on for a long time. Back when they had to work as semi-professional players, that eased it a little bit because they were already exposed to the work environment. And a lot of players just don't quite get the fact, when they go into the work environment now, that there's a lot of women around, and that you have to realise you can't talk in front of a 50-50 room, same as you would in a room full of men, and that's a challenge for a lot of them.
Like age demographics as well, like
that as well.
It's pretty much all 18 to 34.
Yeah. Yep.
All similarly motivated. Same common goal, same interests.
Yeah.
It's very different, and the attitude of, well, you like me for who I am, but you've kind of got to know your audience, and your audience changes.
Yeah, true.
Your audience changes when you're not in that football environment.
Yeah,
it really does. So I think it's safe to say we know the media has a really important role within the game. Like, I think that's probably maybe something players and coaches don't appreciate enough.
No, they don't.
What are your thoughts when, if you're involved in a negative headline, or you say something, I know that it comes from a good place, but when the media gets labelled as crisis merchants, what's your thoughts behind that, or what feelings would that bring up?
It changes depending on what gets said and who says it. Respectfully, I don't think we're really educated in that way. A lot of people, it's very simple, to put the stereotype, all journalists want to do is bag the game, all they want to do is be critical. There's a difference between criticism and analysis. For recently, the Origin series, you question some aspects of the team New South Wales picked or the way Queensland played in Game 2. And I would say that's just analysing the team. You know what I mean? Like the criticism I had of Origin game 1 was that New South Wales didn't pick Jake Trbojevic. I thought he summed up what New South Wales are trying to get to. Is that a criticism or is that just analysing? You know what I mean? Like I would say, and there's a difference, but it's very easy to label us as crisis merchants. And Todd Greenberg, when he was running the NRL, came out and said that.
Yeah.
Which was a way to basically put myself and Phil Rothfield back in the box to try and stop the criticism we had against him and his administration. I pushed on. We both pushed on because the fact is I think what we were saying was right. Now, I'm not always right. I'll admit that. Everyone thinks I think I'm always right. I'm not always right. I get that. But if you're going to tell me I'm wrong, come up with some evidence that's going to change what I have.
Yeah.
Okay?
Don't just say you're wrong.
You're wrong. I don't care what you think. You're wrong.
Yeah.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
Tell me why.
Give me the evidence I'm wrong. And if I accept that evidence and I see that you do have a point, I'll say fair point. And we never know everything. The thing about the media, we never know everything. Like we're not a history book. Okay? It's today's news as it's presented. Now that might change tomorrow. I remember one of my old bosses could not stand Peter Flingos. He wrote a story one day back in the sort of early days of the internet, but he wrote it where the paper was still king, and it was back page, and the story, by the time we were reading at lunchtime the next day, was completely wrong. And my boss called me and said, come here, I want to talk to you about this story. And I thought, oh, here he goes. I'm going to get a 15-minute lecture on what a bad journo he is. And so I went in and I sat down. I was only young at the time, and I hadn't worked with Peter Flingos at the time. And he said to me, mate, you can't bag him for that story. And I said, why is that? And he said, because, mate, when he wrote it was right. He said, changed overnight. He was going there and then he wasn't. But he said, when he wrote it was right. And that's what newspapers are. And with the internet these days, it moves even quicker. But and there's not a journo. The journos that sit there back and they give me the shits, to be honest. The guys that sit back and just sort of as if they're above it all and just this is what's really happening. This is what's really happening. We don't know. Look, we know what we know, and the job is to get the facts that you might tell me. My job is to get them right and write those. I don't know the complete. I don't know what's happening at West Tigers or Canterbury or Warriors, but during a day, people will tell me, mate, they've just spoken to him. Now, okay, if I can verify that and we get it on the record, then it's a story. That's a story. That doesn't mean he's going to go there. That doesn't mean tomorrow he might say no. We saw that with Cameron Serraldo. The Tigers were spruiking to everybody. It's done. We've got him. Over the weekend, he changed his mind. If indeed he had told them that. But certainly the Tigers believed that they had him. So, I get people all the time coming up to me in the pub. I live in the Balmain area, okay? They come up in the pub, they're like, mate, can you lay off the Tigers? And I'm like, all right, mate, what's wrong? Oh, mate, you said this the other day, mate, it's bullshit. Just, mate, give them a break. And I'm like, righto. Mate, I'll tell you what, mate, if they don't, and then they start telling me what they think's wrong. That's human nature.
Yeah.
That's how we are. And I just love these people sit there and like I get people emailing me, going, mate, what do you know about footy, mate? You played one game. And I'll sit there and I think, well, mate, if that's the parameters, right? If that's your parameter about how much you're allowed to talk about the game, is according to how many you've played. You haven't played any.
Yeah.
I mean? What right? Like, how do you question my... Like,
no one would have a right to...
Cameron Smith's the only person that could ever say, because he's played the most games.
Played the most, yeah.
So he can look at the guy who's played second most and say, mate, you've only played 403 games. I've played 435. You know what I mean? Like, if you go on that rush, it just doesn't work. But look, we're supposed to be intelligent people, right, as a species. But we're not. The bigger the group, the dumber we get. Because we just go with that mob mentality. And it's easy to sit there and go, oh, journos, well, they know, they're full of shit, 360, like people sit there and they say about 360, mate. I'll get emails. Mate, piss off the journos. I don't care, mate. I don't want to listen to them, right, all the time. I can break down our show in minute-by-minute numbers that show that every night that's the most viewers we get. Yeah. Every night. And I could sit there and if I looked at the numbers without even seeing the show, I could tell you whether it was 6:53 or 6:58 or 6:57, what time we went to break according to the numbers.
Yeah.
Because they'll go up, they'll go up, they'll go up. And as soon as they go down, that's when the journos left.
Yeah.
Because people want it, that's their news update. It's where they're at. And for all, I know you're you come on as the player's voice, and we have our legends on Wednesday night. So we have different segments, and that's vital for the show. We need that. But people want their news update, and people want to be able to hear. Yeah, and the thing I think the journos, which they do particularly well on our show, is something's happening. Well, mate, I spoke to Tim Sheens today, and this is what he told me.
Well, that's really one of the advantageous positions that you're in, where you have sources. Where if I go on a show, it's just my observations or my opinions, or look to present an argument in a certain way based on something I've read or whatever, something that I think. But when we're talking about those stories, and you mentioned it previously, how many sources would you have? How much chasing up goes into it? Because I guess people see 360 3 times a week, and there's way more to it than that. Just how much sourcing, how much phone calls, how much game watching do you need to do in order to be the best? Because if you weren't providing an important opinion, you'd ultimately, I imagine, Crawls would be like,
you're gone.
You're not going to. We're going to have to move you on.
Yeah, look, your phone rings all the time. Okay, I had a chairman ring me at 7:30 Monday morning. Okay, I had lunch yesterday with another chairman from another club. You constantly hear things. Someone will say, "Mate, have you heard? Luke Brooks is not playing this week." So you'll ring up Tim Sheens. Mate, is this right? You ring up Brett Kamala. You'll ring up someone around the group, which is often where you get your best stuff. Okay, so you just ring up and you just make the calls. And there's a little bit more of a sharing model now in journalism as we've lost more and more numbers and you've got to do more and more work. Journalists are far more comfortable sharing who they've spoken to. But
it's funny you say that, because I have noticed that.
Yeah.
It's that confirmation, I spoke to this person.
Yeah.
Rather than I've heard.
Yeah.
The wording, it's only slight, it's only subtle, but now that you mention it, I have noticed that.
Yeah, and that's, look, if we can source it, we source it. Sometimes someone will tell you something and they don't want to be connected to it. But you've still got to, look, it's really difficult when it comes to sources, Jimmy, from the point of view that there are people you trust more than others. So someone will tell you something and you're like, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if I quite trust you. Whereas someone will tell you something and you just know it's right. I'll tell you a story.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think there's some game playing goes on there?
Oh, always.
Or testing your trust?
No, not really. There's not a testing of our trust anymore. Well, certainly not for me. Maybe for younger journalists, there might be. The game playing gets played in, not from the point of view that they're testing us or whatever. It's more about what message do we want out there. So in the old days, you could ring a guy up and you would say, I'll tell you a good example. So after the Super League War, during the Super League War, I got told Chris Anderson was going to coach Melbourne. Now he was Canterbury royalty. Peter Moore was still his father-in-law and was still the boss of the club. And I said to the person who told me, mate, there's no way Chris Anderson's going to be coaching Melbourne. He said, mate, I'm telling you, it's happening. He said, it's going to be out. And because I trusted the person that told me, I thought, all right, I'll chase this up. So I rang Chris Anderson, miracle of miracles, right? These days, you've got to wait 4 hours if you get the phone call back at all. He answered the phone and I said, look, I want to run this past you. I didn't tell him what it was. I said, I want to run this past you. And if it's wrong or right, tell me. If you don't want to talk to me about it, tell me. I just don't want you to lie to me about it. And back in those days, there was an expectation that you did not lie. So you would ring some people and they go, yeah, mate, it's right, we don't want it out, but you've got it. So I said to Chris, I said, mate, I heard you're going to go coach Melbourne next year. And he saw a bit of a pause and he went, I haven't signed anything, that's not right, I haven't signed anything. And I said, well, I've heard that you're yeah, that's 100% right. And he said, well, he said, mate, I haven't signed anything with Melbourne. He said, I don't know where that's come from. And there was a little bit tricky in the language. I haven't signed anything.
Yeah.
So I said to him, I said, well, mate, I trust who told me. And I said, I'm pretty close to writing this. And he said, look, can you do me a favour? And I said, well, he said, can you not write it? So I thought, okay, there's something here, right? He said, can you not write it? I said, righto. I said, well, so I said, I don't want to not write this. And then in a week's time, I pick up the rival newspaper and there's the story. He said, no, he said, look, he said, I haven't signed anything. He said, I don't want to talk about it. So I thought there's something going on here. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, he's a week or two away from doing this. And hopefully by then, when he's prepared to talk about it, he'll tell me. I was terrified that in the interim, someone else would get it. But he asked me not to write it. So I said, okay, I won't write it. Anyway, the next day I was at work, the phone rings, and it was back there, so we had a landline, and it was Chris Anderson. He said, mate, go with your story. He said, I've just told the players. And I thought, wow. And someone at the club told me later, he went there, this was in the afternoon the previous day when I called him about it. So the next day when the players arrived in the morning, he went out, he sat them all down as they were stretching, and he said, right, I'll just let you know, I've signed to coach Melbourne next year. They said, he then said to him, right, you get on with your warm-up. He went back in the office, got on the phone, rang me, said, go with your story, and then went back out and finished coaching the team. Would never happen these days. Would never happen.
No.
There would be a denial, email out from the club where they would confirm it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the way it used to work. It doesn't work that way anymore. And that's why players today get very frustrated at the media. And, oh, mate, where they come up with this shit, right? Oh, well, that's all bullshit. One, no one tells you the truth anymore, right? They'll tell you the truth if it advantages them. If it doesn't advantage them, no one ever goes, you know what, mate, you got me off sign, but I don't want it out, but you've got it. They don't do that. They just deny it. It's not true, mate. Not true. So we're forced in the coverage of the game to get to this period around the game where you've got to know who you trust and who you don't trust. You got to know who tells you the truth, and that you figure that out over time. You know what I mean? Some guys I really love their company, but 50% of what they say is not right. You know what I mean? Some guys just don't know. Some guys pretend they know. Like after a while, you got to figure out who they all are and what they're like. Some guys, every time they tell you something, you know what's right. Some guys will tell you something that's got every best intention. They just got a poor memory and it didn't quite happen like they recall. You know what I mean? So there's all sorts of different versions that go on, and we get stuck in that, and it's like it snowballs. It gets bigger and it gets faster, the media at the moment, because there's this rush to get it online, and we've got less staff, and so this is all pressures that shouldn't be a pressure, but they are. So what happens is that goes down that road, and ultimately what you got to do is you've just got to find a place where I sit, where I'm just comfortable saying this tonight.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable talking about this, and if I'll sit in this area, and I know I go pretty hard sometimes, right? But to me, that's not me wanting to just kick some bloke in the guts. That's just about, well, this is what's happening, and as a straight talker myself, I just want to know what's happening. I don't want you to sort of shape it in a way. You know, I don't want to, for example, say, oh, mate, I haven't signed anything. I don't want to give you that version.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm more, it's not done or whatever. And look, that's where the media's gone. Now, some get it right more than others. Some get it wrong more than others. Nobody gets it right all the time. And it's, in some ways, it is quite disappointing that we've gone down this road. But that's media the world over, and that's because chicken or the egg. Is it because we started getting lied to, or was it because we were untrustworthy to be told the truth?
Well, I'm just thinking back to my time when I was leaving Canterbury.
Yeah.
Or before that, so there was rumor out there that I was joining St. George.
Yeah.
But at the time, like legitimately at the time,
Yeah.
I was under the impression I was staying at Canterbury.
Yeah.
But what people had done is gone 2 and 2 together. There was probably noise that I was unaware of, that the Bulldogs were under stress in the salary cap. They needed to get rid of an asset.
Yeah.
I was one of those players who needed a front row at the Dragons.
Yeah.
So people put 2 and 2 together, and they maybe someone at the Dragons said they would chase. And but as far as I was aware, I was staying.
Yeah. Well,
so people ask me, "You going?" I'm like,
"No,
I'm staying."
Yeah. Well, I know for a fact, ringing St George, mate, we're after a prop. Canterbury looking to offload Jimmy Graham. We're interested.
Yeah.
And so that was, I know it before you, obviously before you even knew.
Yeah.
But that's the conversations we were having. So then that's when the speculation begins. It gets written on a website, or it goes around somewhere. And that's the thing, Jimmy. The other part of it is fans are so much smarter these days. The fans, the amount of times they'll come to you with information that's pretty close. 30 years ago, you never got that. 30 years ago, I remember when I was at Parramatta, John Money used to finish training or finish a game, and he'd go get in his car. There's a special car spot at Parramatta Leagues Club, coach just said. And he'd get in his car, and he'd have papers that thick. Mate, why are you playing him at fullback for? What's he doing? Everybody's suggestions. They don't do that these days. Now they're on a forum. Yeah. They're in a WhatsApp group. They're sharing all their information. But there are some, like I've got a couple of people who are essentially just fans, but they get some pretty good information. Like, you've got to check it all, obviously. But they'll tell you stuff that you think, what? Where's this going to happen? Make a couple of calls, and everyone's like, not quite yet. Like, who told you that? You know what I mean? And you think, hang on, there's something here. So it's a lot. The world changes, and it's all gone down that road. And it's look, journal. I don't know where it's going to be in 20 years' time. The way we cover the game, to the players who complain about it, the upside for them is they get paid for it. Yeah,
it's huge.
Yeah,
like without the media, is the game semi-professional? It's the TV rights.
Yeah,
that has really accelerated the pay scale.
The media fund 80% of the game. 80% of the game's total revenue comes from media. So, and players have said to me, mate, this is bullshit. You guys have got no right to know this and all that. Yeah, they don't want to talk to media. That's fine. If you don't want to do that, do what Jamie Lyon did. Go out and play for Wee War. Yeah. When it got too much for him and he had enough of it, he said, mate, I'm done. He went out and played for Wee War. He got $500 a game.
He was the bingo caller as well.
He was the bingo caller at the RSL club, and he had a great year. And at the end of the year, he enjoyed himself, won the comp, thought, how good's footy? But I'm earning $500 a game. And so the next year he went back to Manly.
Oh, he came to St Helens?
He went to St Helens.
Yeah, I'll never forget that day when he turned up for pre-season training, and we're expecting this superstar centre, and he'd put on a few kgs and he had this big beard, and it was like, they've sent the wrong Jamie Lyon. Jesus Christ. Yeah. Who have we sent? But anyway,
I went to his house when he was in St Helens, in this little place, and it was he handled his money very well, but he basically went over there. He was earning £1 that time, which was good money. So he just got the most simple little four-wall house.
Yes,
he could find.
in Rainford.
And but that's the reality of it. And see, you hear these conversations now. I see a lot of players who were around when I first started covering the game, and all they want to talk about, there's two. For many years, there was one conversation. What about the money these blokes are earning now? Now there's a second part of the conversation. What about the money they're earning? What about if mobile phones were around in our day? We'd last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's the trade-off, Jimmy. The trade-off is this scrutiny they're all under, the scrutiny, that they get the money. They get compensated for it now. Financially, they get compensated. There's players earning over $1 million a year now. They're pulling in $20,000 a week. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to play a game of footy that they grew up just because they loved. Now, again, if you don't want it, don't play it. No one's forcing you to play. But the price, there is a price. There is a price for everything, and the price is that. Now, I get it. On a far lesser scale, you've got people that intrude in your lives and feel that there's a certain part of you that is public property. There is. That's the trade-off. That's part of what you do.
I think as well, to be fair to our fans, that being public property, the overwhelming majority of our fans of our game are incredibly respectful.
They're terrific, yeah.
And I've said this so many times, as a game and as stakeholders, we are a working class sport.
Yeah.
And the great thing about our sport is you can be, a $50 member at South Sydney, at Sydney Roosters, go to Members Day and get a picture with James Tedesco.
Yeah.
One of the best players that our game's known.
Yeah.
And you can do that, and we have access to the players. Or I live in the Shire, you can walk through cafes in Cronulla and you see 40 players hanging around and you can get a picture with them. So that trade, we need to remember who we are. Or you can go to the pub, you can, what are you doing here? Can I have a picture? Do you want to be here? We have that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of on both sides of it, the fans and the players, that we need to keep hold of that, because it's something that our game's got, that if we lose, we'll look back and you'll see players in roped off areas.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, stay away. And if we're not careful, we'll lose.
Some places are already getting that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's going to become
security
more
around the players. And even, it'd be private dining booths and all this sort of stuff. And it's, for me, we are a working class sport. We are a sport of the people, and we need to remain that. It's vital, or we lose a big part of our identity, I believe, as a sport.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, and I don't know how successful that's going to be. I remember when I was working in England. Actually, I was working at the in the Times building on the News International site, and the Sun was the building over. And Monday morning, you'd sit there, and the young women would come walking past the window, and they were in dresses that looked like bikinis because they were on their way into the Sun to sell their story about some footballer they hooked up with. Yeah. And that's where we can. That's why. So they all isolate themselves because of that over there. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's what we've got to be mindful of trying to avoid. I don't know if we ever. I think that's the road we're heading towards, sadly. But at the moment, you're right. There is still an ability for the game, the players, to connect with Joe Public that's really healthy. Yeah. And but when it's not, and when the players get annoyed about it, that's when they've got to remind themselves that they're earning money that previous generations never had, and it's because of the media that pays for the game. Yeah.
On the media side of things, 360 based onto the scene. Obviously, you'd been around the game and on TV before that, but I think it was really 360 that springboarded you into the personality that you are now. Did you ever imagine it would grow into a 3-night-a-week show and the premier? I think in most people's opinion, the premier show for people to go to get their NRL news fix.
Look, no, I wouldn't say I did. It was a bit of a journey to get to where we're at now, and I certainly don't think we're sort of at the end of where we're at. I don't know how it's going to evolve. I said the other day, we were talking at work, and it's an old quote, but we're talking about just the show and things we've got to do differently, and I can feel some days like it's the same, but I said, it's like the oceans. It's always different, but always the same. You know what I mean? And that's what I think the show's got to be. It's like the Coke sign, for example. There's subtle change. Nobody ever notices the difference in the Coke sign, but it's different from how it was first drawn. And that's what 360 is. We had no idea when we started it. When Ike and I first sat down and were put on the job, and we didn't know each other at the time. We knew each other. Yeah, we were mates. We knew each other, but we weren't mates. We probably spoke to each other, had spoken 3-4 times in our lives, and nothing more than, how you going, mate? Is everything okay? So we got thrown together on that, and out of that, firstly, we got a really healthy respect for each other. Ben's really intelligent, and I like being able to bounce with him, and I like being able to, I like hearing he had alternative views to me on a lot of matters, and I respected those because they were coming from somewhere. It's not just, they weren't a reaction to what I was saying. It wasn't a, you're wrong and this is how I think. It was, this is another way to look at what we're talking about. So I really respected how he went at things, and I think out of that, people sort of began to pick up on that. Certainly over time, opinions have changed on me on the show. At first, it was like, mate, who are you? Why do I care? Shut up. Get a player on there next to Ike, and And I get that. You know, I couldn't give a rat's ass about it, to be honest. And yeah, people talk to me about it. Like I always said, I've said this to a few people. When I first started doing TV, I'd be before a show, I'd be in the dressing room, and I'd hear ex-players, Channel 9 and up the hallway talking about something that had happened the previous night in a game, and they go, "Mate, what about that? That's bullshit. He should have been sent off for that." And then they go on air and they'd be like, "Oh, I didn't see too much wrong with it. He's a good guy." The old good guy defence. He's a good guy. He wouldn't have meant it. And that's it. And you think, well, hang on. So I thought that, people would rather hear from them than from me, right? I get that. Like, what do I know and what's my stake in the game compared to theirs? I get that. But as I said earlier, we're getting smarter with our access to forums and all this. Fans, the hardcore fans really know their footy now.
Yeah.
And they really understand their footy. So you can't bluff them like you used to be able to. Back in the day when I first started, there was no internet. There was the footy show had just started one night a week. That was it. Pay TV hadn't even got going at the time. So there was the footy show, which was basically a variety show. All Football Matters really got dealt with in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was a bit of a comedian.
Yeah,
it was a comic.
And it was great. Everyone loved it. It was great television. But that was it. And if fans wanted to protest, they had to write a letter to the club, or they had to stick notes under John Money's windshield, windscreen wipers. But over time, and with everybody with mobile phones now able to exchange information, able to send photos to each other of different things. The amount of times you get sent a photo of someone somewhere. And so what happened, that's all changed. And as I started coming through the TV side of it, I just thought the one thing I can do is tell people the truth. And when I say the truth, that's not a high and mighty, I know everything. That's the truth as I know. To my point before, I'll give you as much truth as I know. I never will take you somewhere that I know is wrong, which I've seen others do. I just won't do that. There's no benefit in that for me. So if you're an ex-player, I get that you want to hear from them rather than me. People would much rather hear your opinion on footy than me, right? I get that. But so the one thing I can offer, though, is to actually say, you know what? I've made the phone calls today. I've spoken to 3-4 different people. I spoke to the coach. I spoke to the player. I spoke to whoever. And this is what I've been told. And sometimes it's an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, to Jimmy, mate, are you going to Saints? No. Yeah. I've had nothing. I'm staying here. Saints. Mate, there's word around here after Jimmy. Mate, yeah, we are. We're keen. Canterbury want to get rid of him. Yeah. We got room in our cap for him. We're trying to get him. So then you've got to go back to you and say, well, mate, hang on. But you don't want to believe it. Yeah. You said to the football, they don't want to upset you in case it doesn't work. Yeah. So Canterbury go, well, mate, no, there's nothing in that. So I'll go on the air and I'll say, well, there's word that he's going to be ending up playing at St. George within a fortnight.
I'd say you wouldn't put it like that, though. You're a smart man and you can construct an argument and hold a conversation. Is that something that comes naturally to you, or did you have to I guess, would you learn how to do that? Are you conscious of that, or
no? Probably a bit of both. But I understand.
You've got to be able to. You can't just say he's going there and that's it. There's a way that you communicate.
You've got to present a case. Yeah. You've got to present a case. So what I will do, and this annoys the shit out of some people, right? But you got to construct your argument to present a case about why whatever you're saying is correct. And as I said, if somebody says to me, yeah, but mate, you're basing that on this, which is wrong, I'll take that aboard. Now that might be enough to make me go, okay, I've got it wrong, or might make me just sort of have to adjust on the run. So it's not quite that way, but it's this way, and we'll adjust on the run. But the ultimate outcome's still going to be pretty close to where I put it. It's all shades of grey, but you've got to present a case, particularly on TV and radio and the electronic media, because people are listening to you. It's easier when you're writing in many ways because you can just. I'm very methodical in how I try to reason things out. Probably that's where it's come from, and. So the way I present the case is you just tell the story from a chronological point of view, that this happened, but then this has happened, but this has changed things and this has changed things, and you're trying to take people where you're going. And what we do on air, someone will say, yeah, but I heard this or I heard that. And we adjust on the run. And again, you counter what they've heard against how sure you are about your information. There are nights there that, I'll say, look, I've heard this. I don't know if it's right. And someone will say, no, it didn't happen. And I'm happy to run with that. Yeah, that always gets missed. I mean, everyone just thinks you sit there and I'm always insisting I'm right. I know I'm not always right, but you've got to start from a position, as we all do when we express an opinion, that you believe that opinion's right. And I won't try and give you an opinion that deep down I know is wrong. Even this year, and this is how things subtle it can be, like when I think it was Mitch Barnett got suspended at the Knights, and they did and I did the check and release, and everyone's just taking the piss out of me, right? That what gets missed in that was, I said, this is how Newcastle's going to present the argument. It's not what it wasn't me pushing it, but that bit just got overlooked straight away, and everyone just wanted to jump on me. You know what I mean? And mate, what do you know? You're a dickhead. Like, well, that's just, mate, you're wrong. And there was just such a weight of noise coming at me. I just thought, I just run with it.
Yeah,
just let them have their way with me, and off they go, because that's the way we're doing it. So and I'm happy to cop a few wounds. What I mean, that happens from time to time on the show, and you've just got to accept it. So.
Yeah. With 360, obviously, like we said, it's evolved. Your relationship with Benny Eichen evolved, and you're great mates. You obviously spent a hell of a lot of time together. Yeah. Him moving on, and going on to take that role up in Brisbane. How did that make you feel? Because obviously, I think you two were the glue of the show. You were the conductors together. What sort of feelings did that invoke?
It was a shock, because it all happened over a weekend. So,
yes, it did. Yeah.
So I'd spoken to him regularly over the years, where he gets this. Ben always had itchy feet. He's a dreamer, and he's always looking at a new world to conquer, and media was part of that at one point in his life. And for a few years there, he grabbed me at the end of the year and he goes, mate, I'm thinking of moving on, a bit bored. And I said to him, listen, mate, you work in a job where you work 7 months a year, 3 days a week.
It is the best job in Australia he had.
I said, and you're pretty well paid for it. Okay, so just before you go in to do that, and then what he would do is he'd get other jobs, working a couple of days with his mates as a sales rep and all this sort of stuff in, I think it's construction industry and all that. And I think it was a bit of a reality check, but he did have the eye for the Broncos CEO job, which he went close to getting. He missed out on that, and then he came in one day and he just said, I've taken a job at the Broncos as head of football. And we were all like, whoa. And he had the first conversation was on the Friday, worked it out over the weekend, and came in Monday. So it happened that quickly. We just said, well, mate, finish the week. So he only had 3 shows to go. Finished the week, and we basically just went into emergency status to try and find someone to replace him. And Vonnie was there for a while. She's obviously off on maternity leave now, and then Braith come in, and I get all sorts of comments about it from different people. And I just say it's like when you get a new halfback. You might try and play a similar type of style, but things are going to change. Yeah, it's just the personality. So the try and sit there and I said to Braith when he first started, I said, look, just be mindful of one thing. People are going to judge where you start against where I can finish. Yes. It's an unfair comparison.
It is.
And if you go back to our first shows, it was a lot rougher. We got smoother as we got more into it. We did it for 9 years, Ben and I, that show. And I said to Braith, I said, just don't let the slings and arrows get you. And mate, we'll work through with you. It'll be okay. And I think he's doing a terrific job. Yeah, he really is. So he came through.
He doesn't have that.
Yeah, no.
That'll come. When for those people that are watching on the visual side, Benny Eichen used to have that habit of putting his finger out when he wanted to take control. Yeah. When did that start?
Well, I don't know. I think that was pretty early. That started because what happened was people would just start, like, it was just a bit of pile on, and everyone wanted to be heard. But then in Ben's ear, they're saying, mate, you got to move on, or you may get control of Kent, you know what I mean? It'd be something like that. So you'd have to put the finger out, which was basically finish what you're saying and then shut up. And look, Braith's starting to learn that a little bit. He's getting there. But look, I'm enjoying it with Braith. I think it's great. I actually, sort of the tail off your story there. I spoke to Ike last week, and he said, mate, my mates are giving me a hard time. And I said, why is that? He said, well, mate, I'm just dealing with something up here. He said, mate, it's just taking all my time. He said, normally mates are saying, mate, you left a job. We worked 3 days a week for 7 months a year, and look at you now. He's doing 6-7 days a week. He's working 12 hours a day, and he ain't getting a break until Christmas times.
But you know what, though? It's bizarre that some people are attracted to that.
Yeah.
Like, and you think you want to live in this utopia.
Yeah.
And this easy life,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not what people, it's my belief that it's not what people want. I mean, whether or not you'd want to go into that football manager's role or CEO role, like, I don't know if I want that.
No.
But I certainly don't want the easy life. It just doesn't work. And I can, as much as it's, most people think, oh, that's the dream, is the 3 day a week, getting paid well, 7 months a year. For a lot of people, and Ben's proof. He's like, well, no, give me that stress.
Yeah.
Give me that responsibility. Because really, as the host of 360, there's not, obviously you're on live TV, but there's not that same stress.
No, I have a theory that we all have the amount of stress in our life that we can cope with. Probably a little bit more than we'd like, but it's always what we can cope with. And the way to explain that is the stress in my life is minimal compared to the stress in, say, Richard Branson's life.
Yeah.
Or who else Rupert Murdoch's life, Elon Musk's life. Like you look at the politicians, the stress in Joe Biden's life.
Yeah.
Like we have this, so you absorb what you can, and there's just once you get to your bucket's full, it's just like, mate, I just can't deal with that.
Yeah.
Just leave that out. So we do that, but we do need it in our lives, mate, to get us moving, because without it, you become lazy.
Yeah.
You just sit back and you need stress. It provides energy in your life.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, mate. And to Ben's point, Ben was always a guy who always challenges himself, is always looking for a challenge. And that's why at various points he'd go and volunteer to write articles just because he wanted to get his brain going down that way and do that thing. So over the 9 years we did the show, he would take on little projects at various times to just bring that into his life. Ultimately, look, I wish him the best. I wish he'd stayed. I thought, I enjoyed working with him. That said, I still talk to him once or twice a week. I'm having a lot more fun than him.
Yeah.
And I think Braith's doing a great job.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the bucket being full. My mum's bad for that. Like, I'm so busy.
Yeah.
I'm like, sorry? Like, what, you had to go grocery shopping?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and then you have to come and make
the car park was full.
Yeah. Honestly, it's the queues at Asda. You should have seen it. And then, I had to go and queue up for a coffee.
Yeah.
And I'm back. I made dinner.
Yeah.
Not stopped. And you're like, well.
And you think, if that was my life, how easy would that be?
Like, Mum, like, that's seems like a pretty decent day to me. Like,
exactly.
Oh, no, but I'm so stressed.
Yeah.
Oh, what? And because I'm one of seven, so it's like my phone doesn't stop ringing. I'm like, Mum, it's my three sisters calling you. Like,
exactly.
you're not trading stocks.
Yeah.
It's my sister calling saying, can you come and look after one of the kids? Like, that's what it is.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Anyway, it's not just rugby league that's been a part of your life. You're also a huge boxing fan, and you commentate on the boxing. Where does that come from?
Oh, look, mate, I can remember when I was a kid, my mum and dad took myself and my brother just down to the local youth club. There was a fight night. I would have been 6 or 7. I got no idea. We never did it again. I don't know why we were there that night, but we did that night. And I remember just being it's a bit of a sort of awe-inspiring experience watching these guys punch each other, sweaty and shiny and fit and muscly. And I remember just at the time, and they were, none of them were good fighters. I remember as a as far as going to titles and stuff like that. But I remember just being captivated by it. And then about, I don't know, 5-6 years later, when I was about 11 or 12, my father said to me, "Do you want to go down to the gym and do some boxing?" For footy, I was playing footy at the time and get fit and all that sort of stuff. And I was very much a small kid. I was nearly always the smallest in my year at school. So I think that's probably was what he was thinking about. Back in the days when, it was important that your young bloke could handle himself a bit, that sort of business. You can't do it these days. But I grew out of that. The irony being when I got there, I remember the bloke who I remember was fighting, he was still there. And I remember him training in a black plastic garbage bag, and he's shadowboxing in front of the mirror, and the sweat that was coming off him, he couldn't see himself in the mirror at the end of it. But I just there's something in boxing that really appeals to me. George Foreman said once, he said, boxing is the sport that all others aspire to. And I reckon in sport, all the qualities in sport that we admire, you find that in greater quantities in boxing. The courage, the suffering, all of it.
It's highly skillful as well.
Highly skillful.
Like it's not it's not as barbaric as what people make.
It's not too much.
Some people,
swinging.
it's not. There's a tremendous amount of skill involved, which takes years to master, and it's dangerous as well. I think the dangerous side is what attracts people to it.
And whatever's in other sports that you admire, it's escalated in boxing. I remember, even Jimmy, only 15 years ago, I suppose it would have been, I was sort of past athlete age, but I still go to the gym and do some sparring and moving around and all the rest of it. And Brian Wilmot, who's a very good cup man, you often see him in the corner of a lot of fights. And we were just at the gym one day, and Brian was just showing me some combinations on the pads. But beyond that, he was showing me the footwork of it all. So when you do this, your feet have got to be here, and then just pivot on that toe, and the science to it just fascinates me.
Yeah.
And I've got a friend, Joel Keegan, who's a very good fight trainer. He's a bit the same. He's fascinated by the science of it, and it's not all about just being the fittest or the hardest puncher, which a lot of trainers, they just get their fighters fit, and then it's be first, and they just basically send them into a brawl.
Yeah.
And when you begin to understand the science of it, it opens up a whole new room for you. And the part that then is unlike footy, which has changed so much, because we keep tinkering with the rules in rugby league, the game's changed. And we sort of come from this low mark where there's very little science in the game in the 40s and 50s. And as we've sort of got more and more knowledge and more things that can help out the coaching, and the rules also are changing that, which then means that what you used to be able to do, you can't do or whatever. The game's changed. So and the game for a lot of people doesn't look like it, for anyone. It does not look like the game that they grew up with. Boxing still does. And boxing, a lot of the stuff that trainers were teaching their fighters back in the 40s and 50s and that era are still being taught today, and are still relevant today, and are still necessary today. And so this whole science, there's an old trainer called Manny Blackburn who used to train Joe Lewis. Now, Manny Blackburn was just this old sort of hustler. It's like he just came from somewhere out of the deep south, and no one knew where he came from or what his background was. But he used to teach Joe Lewis, and when Joe Lewis would do a training, and all the media would turn up before a fight, and he'd be doing the stuff, and Blackburn would train with him. But then once they'd all left, he'd say, right, and they'd go down into the room, and it was just, and they say the stuff he taught him there, just the little intricacies of, if you just move him half an inch this way, or just all that little subtle stuff, just pull an elbow here, just turn him around a bit, just things like that are just very subtle. And he used to teach him all this science, and that's what made Joe Lewis the fighter he was. And but a lot of that's disappearing. A lot of that's going out of the sport because they're like old horse trainers. They don't want to share their secrets. But there's still a lot of that stuff is still practical today. And there are still some sort of masters of the dark arts that can still teach that today. And when you find those guys who can just talk to you about just little subtleties here and there, and It's fascinating to sit down.
I think that's why I like watching Tyson Fury so much, because he presents as this guy who's just going to go out there and get involved in a slugfest.
Yeah.
But if you look at his footwork and his head movement,
Yep.
it's phenomenal. You almost don't see it coming.
No, he's very clever.
You almost have to watch it in slow motion to appreciate it.
Yeah.
To appreciate how much movement and how hard it is for such a big man to almost dance.
Yeah.
The way he does. I remember reading before he fought Klitschko the first time, and he went on the day of the fight. He went on the mat and he was like, "There's too much sponge in this."
Yeah.
And they were like, "No, it's what we agreed on." He's like, "No, it's too thick."
Yeah.
So Klitschko had tried to Klitschko's team, because the fight was in Germany, had tried to put in an
extra layer.
An extra layer of canvas.
Yeah.
To slow.
It makes it spongy,
Yeah,
therefore makes it harder for him to move. So therefore he'll sit down more where he's at, because his legs will get tired.
Yeah.
Klitschko will be able to hit him.
Yeah. So and Fury was adamant on the day of the fight.
Yeah.
He was like, "Get it removed or I'm not fighting."
Yeah.
And it was that game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
And then they realised he's being serious here. He's not going to fight, because he knew how important his footwork was.
Yeah.
And how much that extra sponge would take out of his stamina.
Yeah.
And you hear, like, for most people, they hear stories like that and like, just punch him.
Yeah.
What's it
Why would you
matter?
worry?
There's way more to it than meets the eye, just trying to knock people out. But I guess one of the beauties of boxing is you've always got that potential for that big punch as well. So there's that when you're watching it, you've got this game of skill.
Yeah.
But you've also got this thing in the background just brewing, just what you know
Yeah.
at any point someone could get knocked out, which, no one, very careful how we speak about violence, but there is an attraction to that as well.
Of course there is. And there's nothing better than watching a bloke get knocked out. As much as you can. You know what I mean? Like Mike Tyson's still the most popular fighter of the last 30 years because of what he could do. Yeah, and still trades on that. Like his ability to just be in a fight and then all of a sudden, boom, just gone.
Yeah, it's over.
You know? And you talk about science. Like he learned a style of fighting that was very different than what most did. But Customato, who was his trainer, who taught him how to fight, I've got a book upstairs where they asked Customato in the 70s, what's your ideal heavyweight look like? And Mike Tyson didn't come till another 15 years later. But he describes Mike Tyson, not too tall, well-muscled, fast hands, good feet, good head movement, devastating puncher. So when Mike Tyson walked into his gym at 15, and they said, have a look at him, what do you think? He looked at him and said, he'll be the youngest heavyweight champion ever, this kid. After one spar, that's what he said about it, because he just ticked every box Customato. It's like he just been delivered. He ordered him
perfect
online.
specimen.
And that's what he did. And Tyson did all that until he fluffed it all up, you know. But
on boxing as well, we've seen a few former NRL players enter into the boxing ring. Do you like what they're doing?
Yeah, I do. I like what some of them are doing. Some of them are a bit embarrassing. I really respect what Paul Gallen's done.
Yeah.
And until I saw Justin Hodges at his last fight, where it actually looked like he'd finally learned how to fight, how to box. Justin Hodges was a great fighter on the field, but back then you grab a collar with one hand and you can just throw the trip hammer with the other. But his first few fights, he was all right hand happy. He didn't know what a jab was there for. And I just thought, mate, I wished he wasn't doing it, particularly after he got knocked out. I thought, mate, that's enough. But then his last fight against Ben Hannett, I actually thought you can see the improvement in him. What was interesting, it was a couple of fight cards ago with the footballers, it was when they all began to wrestle each other because they were uncomfortable punching each other. So as soon as they come together, quick exchange and then fall on each other and then wrestle. And that's bad. That's just not what the sport is. But what was interesting when I watched that, I thought this is just where we've got to now with rugby league. The poor referee is trying to pull them apart. Now, if you get two fighters who are pure boxers and they come together and they clash and they get caught in a bit of a hole with each other, as soon as the referee puts a hand on them, they'll step back and just, okay, separated, okay, right, now box, off we go. The footballers, they're like, no, I'm not letting him go. He can let go first. And I just thought, like, this is such a rugby league mentality. I'm not going to listen to the official. That's it, you know. I'm not going to get off him until I have to get off him. And didn't want to give up any advantage. And when I was watching it, I thought these guys need to be really sat down and explained. Like, there's rules in this sport that you don't blame in rugby league, which I think we've gone far too far down this track of just ignoring the referee's instructions and complaining about the referee when he acts on it. But in boxing, they started to do it, and I thought, guys, you're really putting on a stinker of a show here, because it just looks awful, you blokes just hanging on to each other and refusing to let each other go, as much as the referee's in there just trying to pull them apart like this. Like, do yourself a favour and learn to box. Learn about space. The one thing they don't understand, the footballers, is the space between you. And where the danger zone is, where you can hit and not be hit. They don't understand angles, all the rest of that sort of stuff, which I get that. They're still very much novices in that sport. But I also think it's incumbent upon them to actually try and learn that, given the fact that they're going to ask to be paid for it. Yeah,
I agree. And, you know, it's not for me to say what the public want to see, but I do feel for those young fighters that have dedicated their life to it, and then all of a sudden some ex-footballer comes along and is getting paid 10 times the money. But, you know, some of them, like Gallen, has gone on to some big things, and I appreciate Paul Gallen's honesty. He's like, I'm a prize fighter.
Yeah.
That's what I am.
Money.
Yeah.
Thing about it too, Jimmy, is that we live in the age of celebrity.
Yeah. Well, we see it with the YouTube boxers, which again they're getting, or the, you know, the cross collaboration between MMA and boxing, with Conor McGregor fighting Floyd Mayweather. Like that's like, it's a no contest, really.
Yeah.
Like,
Floyd Mayweather told everybody what round he'd win. He had 15 million on himself to win round 10 against Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
Like, he posted the ticket. He posted the ticket after he won. Yeah, I mean, like, that's how easy it was for him. But we all fell for it. Like, I can't tell you the amount of people saying to me, mate, Conor's a chance, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on. Like, like that. It's just a different sport. It's like when rugby league play rugby union. Whatever code they're playing, doesn't matter how good you are, that code will win.
Yeah, because there's, I think there was one back in England. There's a
couple.
First half was union, second half was league, and it was just,
it was 40-0 one way, and it ended up 44-40.
Yeah.
You know?
It was just largely pointless.
Yeah, it was pointless, and they're just two different games. And even though they look similar, like MMA and boxing, they're not similar. And you see the MMA fighters, they stand all wrong as boxers.
Yeah,
their balance is all wrong. So because as an MMA guy, you've got to be wary of the legs. Boxers don't have to worry about the legs, so they just balance differently. So there's a lot happening there. But I just think if you're going to get in there and you're going to cop the money, respect the sport enough to actually go and learn to fight.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. On to other pastures. You've interviewed, you know, some colourful celebrities. Who'd be your favourite person outside of the sporting arena that you've sat down and spent some time with?
Outside, from the entertainment place, the best one was Johnny Depp.
Oh yeah,
who was really cool. So I interviewed him in England. You've ever seen the movie Notting Hill? With Hugh Grant. So you know that scene in the movie where he goes to see her at the hotel and he suddenly gets swept into a room and there's an actor there he's got to talk to, and he's from Horse and Hound, and you know. And then I
can't recall it that well. But anyway,
it's just like that though. You got to sit down with all these actors, and mate, to be honest, they're hard work. Like, they are so indulged, a lot of these people. And so I had an interview with Johnny Depp, and they said to me, mate, you've got. I had a one-on-one with him for 20 minutes. Which that's really rare. Like, you usually get a group interview where there's 7 or 8 of you, or you can get an interview where you get 10 minutes or whatever. But because of the power of news, they said you got 20 minutes with him. And right at the end, they said to me, look, this young girl's come from Germany to interview him. Her time slot's gone. Can she come in? And I said, yeah. I had no interest in it. It was the Sweeney Todd movie, which was awful. Right. So anyway, I go in there to interview him, and I said, look, if you've got a couple of questions, you can just ask him. And anyway, so we sit down, we start talking, And then, you know, she said to me, have you got anything? So I asked him a couple of questions or whatever. And he said something. I can't remember what it was, but he said something. And it reminded me of a story. So me being me, I told him my story. Like, as if I don't know why I gave a rat's ass that he'd care. But anyway, but he started laughing. And then he told me something back. And then I told him something back. And then Tim Burton sort of stuck his head in the door. And Tim Burton goes, you all right? And he goes, mate, come and sit down. Come and sit down. Listen to this. Listen to this. And he said, tell him. So whatever. I wish I remember the story. But anyway, so I told Tim Burton the story. Anyway, we end up sitting there, and then the lady comes in and she says, righto, 2 minutes to go. And he goes, no. He said, come back in 10. And so she goes away, and 10 minutes later she comes back, and Tim Burton by this stage is telling us about how Sacha Baron Cohen, when he's auditioning for the role in Sweeney Todd, came in and sang every song from Fiddler on the Roof. And he's copying or he's mimicking Sacha Baron Cohen singing this song, and we're just having a laugh. And yeah, again, we're just telling the story. And the lady comes back, she says, right, 2 minutes. He goes, no, go.
Was he having a drink?
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. But in the end, he's like, no. And I said, listen, mate, I've really got to go.
Yeah. It's like, time's up, Johnny. Yeah.
But I did. I said, look, I really. But it was really enjoyable.
Yeah.
It was really enjoyable. And yeah, but that's a rarity. A lot of them are just they sit there and. Yeah, I remember talking to one director, and he's talking about this movie, and I'm thinking, mate, I've clearly watched another movie, because what you're talking about, all these underlying themes you've got in it and all the rest of it, but they get a little bit self-indulged. I remember we had Kate Blanchett one day, and I was at the table this time with a few others, and she had to come in. I think it was 2:20. She was due to start. Anyway, 2:15. She walks past and looks in, and thought, well, she's got 5 minutes, 2:20 comes, and 2:25 comes, and 2:30 comes, and then she walks past, and she's got a cup in her hand and a saucer, and holding a saucer, and she looks in, and I'm thinking, like, what are you doing? Like, if you're late, you're generally doing it. There's a reason you're late. And then she finally came in after a while, and she sat down on this cup, and she had a cup of hot water with a slice of lemon in it, and I just thought, man, this is just not the place for me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And 15 minutes, I don't know what she was doing, but they're just not my people, mate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And a lot of the others, they're just dickheads, to be honest. They're so pampered and indulged that you just sit there and I don't know what world they live in, mate. It's money. Again, they surround themselves with yes people, and they don't have real people saying, listen, mate, that's just really disrespectful what you did there. I remember one day I was sitting there, and I was at one of the hotels, and I got out of the lift, and there's a lady sitting at a little lounge chair outside the lift. So I sat down, and I just started, how you going? You're all right? And we started talking. She told me she was done makeup for the movie that I was there to interview over. And one of the actors got out, the lift opened up, got out, looked at her, and walked on. And her eyes sort of lit up a little bit when she saw him, but he brushed her and kept going. And then one of the women got out, did the same thing. And then Jamie Foxx got out and saw her and knew her name, came over, shook her hand, and she was the happiest woman you've ever seen. And he sat there, how you been? How's family? And when he left, she said to me, oh, he's such a lovely guy. He's like that on set, And she told me how nice he always was on set to her. And I thought it's not that. Like, given everyone else had just walked past her, I knew who she was, but couldn't even be bothered saying hello to her. And I just thought to me that just shows what happens a lot in that world. And I really respected Jamie Foxx for doing that. Like, it was just he could have, well, he shouldn't have, but everyone else did. You know what I mean? Yeah. And he did the right thing. So he always gets a big tick from me. And they're right. I've told the story before about interviewing Kevin Spacey, which was just he's got his own troubles at the moment. But I had to go into his room to interview him in his hotel room, which I view differently now. But he actually sat on the end of the bed while I sat on the lounge. And there's a little tail.
Is there anything you want to reveal?
We'll be carefully because he is going to court. But anyway, so we sat there and he had this little dog, mate. Honestly, it looked like it had been made out of leftovers from others' dogs. You know what I mean? Like it was just this mongrel-looking thing, and it stunk and had bad teeth. And it's funny because before I went in to interview him, a couple of the media sort of entertainment writers they were having a conversation. I said, "Did you bring over Freddie or whatever the name of the dog was?" Righto. And one guy said, "Oh, I don't know. I hadn't seen him for a while." And they talked about this dog like it was actually a person. You know what I mean? And I soon got an idea why. Like he just treated this dog like an adult. You know what I mean? Like it was human. And it kept jumping up on the lounge and coming over to sort of sniff me hand and lick me hand and stuff. And I'm trying to write notes. I'm old fashioned. I write notes. I don't have a tape recorder. And I'm trying to write, and this dog keeps pushing up against me. And then I'm thinking, mate, like I'm in my head. I'm like, mate, tell your dog to get off the lounge and get back on the floor. You know what I mean? That's what I would do. Anyway, but he's sitting there and he's smiling at his dog and all the rest of it. So I'm just sitting there thinking, mate, and so I'm sort of trying to subtly sort of push the dog away with my elbow as I'm riding. You know? I'm sort of making out it's how I'm riding, and I'm sort of trying to nudge the dog away. And in the end, he had his valet come in and ask him something. So he looked at the valet. So I took the opportunity and gave the dog a bit of a nudge off the lounge. And he turned just at that point and caught me.
Oh.
So it pretty much went sour after that. And I just remember thinking, it's not even worth asking any more questions now. Like I just said, anyway, mate, thanks for your time. And off I went. So, but again, just the indulgence of Hollywood actors, mate. It's staggering, mate.
I can only imagine. I'm not a big fan of dogs, and for me, there's not. You go over to someone's house and the dog's all over you, and they're like, "Oh, he likes you," and you're like, "Can you get it down, please?" I don't particularly want to smell like dog. And mate, it's really cute, but now can you?
No, this dog
get rid of it
too. I just remember just thinking, mate, come on, like just say to your dog, get out.
Yeah.
So that was one of them, but I had a good time. I'll tell you the other person who I really admire. I only tell you quickly now. When I was in Iraq. Remember that Donald? What was his name? It was this Australian bloke who got kidnapped. It would have been before he came. He was an Australian bloke over there. He got kidnapped, and he was in Australia working security or working for some construction company over there. And the Sunnis or the Shiites, I'm not sure which one. One of them took him, and they were asking for a ransom for him. Anyway, came out. This little soldier, Colonel Muhammad, his name was, he went and he had a group that were just like terrorising the terrorists. And I was at a hospital in Baghdad, and someone said to me, "You know that bloke that saved that Australian bloke?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, he's up the hallway. And so I thought, well, so I went up to have a chat to him. And unbelievably impressive. Like, he was 5'3", but he had these soldiers, like they were just like this crack group of soldiers who were basically going around Baghdad, and wherever the bad guys were, they would just find out which house they were in, kicking the door in, shooting them up or grabbing them, and when everyone was getting kidnapped at the time, they were just grabbing them and pulling them out. And that's what he did, the Aussie guy. He just basically got told he was in a certain house, so he just went around his group, they just went in, just went guns firing, got the Aussie out. And I sat there talking to him, and he started taking me through some of the stories and just how I've never met a more impressive leader, Jimmy. Like he just knew what he needed to do. And there was no airs and graces about him. His soldiers under him were completely devoted to him, like completely devoted. Like you could see the love in their eyes when they talked about him. And wherever he said, we're going, they didn't question him. They knew that he had their safety in mind. They knew it was going to be dangerous, but they knew he was going in first. And they just adored him. And so I stayed in contact with him for quite a while, and to the point where he used to email me once I got back to Australia, and we'd chat. And then towards the end, he said to me, he asked me for help to get him to Australia, if I could get him to Australia. So I contacted the government and said, look, can we help out here? And they were a little bit, oh, mate, there's been a lot going on. I said, look, so I sort of escalated a little bit, and I was staying in contact with him to find out if he had any approaches or anything. And then the government finally did come back and say, look, we're having a look at it and seeing what we can do for this guy. And then just as they got to that stage, the American government said, mate, because what they did was, because the bad guys couldn't get him, they started going after his family in America, in Baghdad. So then the American government came in and just grabbed him and his whole family and took them all to America. He moved over there, and which I've lost contact with him since then, sadly. But
Wow.
but he was, like, when you talk about people who stand out in your life, and I remember sitting down with him. At first, I was like, "Oh, look, it was a story for a day at the time."
Yeah.
But just the impact he had on people around him, and the ability for, I just remember these soldiers, because I talked to them after it, and they didn't care where he asked them to go, they were going. And they knew that it's going to be dangerous, but a chance of coming out, because he's already done all the reconnaissance and he knows better than anybody what we're going to do.
Yeah,
and
he's old man.
Oh, mate, he was so impressive. And there was nothing on. He would have weighed, I don't know, 65 kilos. You know what I mean? He would have been 5'3", but he just, mate, you could see when he walked, the presence he had, and everybody stepping back a bit, just watching him walk past. It was really empowering and more powerful to watch.
Yeah, it's amazing that stayed with you all this time as well.
Yeah. Well, that
just
was
a story on a.
Yeah. Met him in a hospital sat in a hallway at a hospital in Baghdad, and he brought some people in that he'd rescued. They'd been tortured and whatnot, so he was making sure they were all right, and then he was just heading back out on the road and going after them all.
Just cracking on.
It was really good.
Yeah. I bet. Back to rugby league and your 30 years of covering the game. What headline or what news story has shocked you the most?
Probably it's probably the Super League war. What happened with Super League? So Super League, there was a lot of whispers around that that it was happening. I remember I was working at the Sun Herald at the time, and it was a Saturday night, and with the Sunday papers, there's a lot of competition. So we used to get early editions. So I used to go over to the news building, and when the driver would come back with their first edition, their state editions, I'd say to him, mate, can I just grab a paper? He didn't know I worked at the opposition. I said, mate, can I grab a paper? He'd go, yeah, sure, mate. And that worked until Buzz caught me out there one day. Buzz looked at me and said, what are you doing here? And I said, nothing. He's like looking at me. He's out the front having a smoke, and he's just looking at me going, yeah, he couldn't figure out what I was standing there for, like was I there to be interviewed or whatever? And then the driver comes back, and it was my mistake at the time. I should have just said done nothing. But I said to the driver, mate, can I grab a paper? And he just went, yeah, there you go. And he gave me the paper, and Buzz saw me. After that, mate, boom, gone, cut me off. But we used to get both sides used to get the early editions to see what news they had. And if you miss a story, mate, get on this. We'll get it by the time we get to the city edition. And the story was an Aaron Rapist story about, I can't remember what he'd done. There was an Aaron Rapist, so we'd missed it. Sunday Telegraph had it. So we thought, oh, shit, this is a big story. So if they had nothing, boss would say, mate, go home. If they had something, then I'd sit there till 10 o'clock at night chasing up, trying to do it. So I sat there that night chasing up this Aaron Rapist story and whatever it was, and finally got it done. And just as I was like, mate, we're done, the next edition came through, which they'd held back the story, and it was the front page where they had all the little headshots of the Broncos, the Raiders. I think a couple of Cowboys were on there, and it just had signed, and like Super League was now on, and like the sick feeling in your guts when you know you've missed the story, and you just sat there and thought, oh, and mate, because they had quotes, they had the whole lot, and we had nothing. And that was the night. I still remember just looking at the front page, and everyone just in the office just looking at it going, mate, we're in trouble here. But that was the start of 3 years then of the Super League war. which it was a daily story. And in those early days when they were still scrambling to sign people and clubs and all the rest of it, you've never seen a news cycle like it. Like, it was like you'd have a story at 2 o'clock and you walk in and say to your boss, "Oh, look, I've got this story," and they go, "Whoa, mate, right, put that on the back." 4 o'clock, someone else will come home, "Mate, I've got this," and they go, "Mate, get rid of yours, put it on the back." You know what I mean? And it was unbelievable. And people who haven't lived through it will never fully appreciate what it did, because it caused scars in the game that are still there. It broke relationships that are still broken. There was a bit of a oneness about the game back then. Now there's definitely two sides of the war still. There's the news side and now the Channel 9 sort of Fairfax side, which still exists. And that sort of has now permeated itself into a lot of the coverage of the game and how it's covered. Various officials around the game and players at the time who were forced to have their allegiance. And everyone can say what they like, but everybody acted out of self-interest. You know what I mean? There was nobody for the good of the game said, "I'm going to do this or that." Because at the time, the war was so volatile that there was a genuine fear, and people will live this fear for several years, that if we lose this, I'll be unemployed. I won't have a job. Yeah, it was that serious. If Super League wins the war and there's no ARL competition anymore, all those officials and players, some of the players obviously would have gone over, but there was a real feeling that was your job, that you would lose your job and you'd be that career over. And it migrated into the media a little bit as well. And it turned very nasty. There's a lot of nasty stuff written, and it sort of set the tone, I think, for a lot of stuff that still gets written. Yeah. And that's all a fallout of the Super League. Well, I can remember, talk about players and their relationships with the media and stuff like that. Relationships with the fans. If you wrote something that was very rarely written before the Super League war about players and whatever happened off field. The rule before Super League was just blokes went to a pub and played up, unless there was police charges, it wouldn't get reported. If they went on tour and played up, unless the police were involved, wouldn't get reported. So that was the sort of the line. If you unless there's police involvement, fair play. Do whatever you got to do. You know what I mean? And the fans very much felt that as well. If occasionally something did get in, which is very, very rare, and I can't remember it happening, but I know that there was. I do remember fans going, "Mate, lay off the bloke, mate. Look, he's just a young kid. He's having a night out." And so there was a criticism of the media if they wrote anything along those lines. But what's happened, almost like a switch going off, with Super League, the fans started ringing us. "Mate, I'm walking along here and this bloke's carrying like a dickhead," because there was a resentment, I think. This is my sort of amateur psychology to it all. I think there was a resentment to how much money they were suddenly earning. Yeah. So they were no longer seen as one of them who just could play footy better. They were players. They all went out and bought BMWs, and it's famously the Broncos were betting $500 in the mid-90s on whose luggage would come out first when they'd fly to an away game. So there's all this excess that just came into the game back then. A good Australian player, as Australian players earned $100,000 a year. The salary cap was $1.8 million. Super League came out. By the time they came back, Parramatta and St George had a salary cap in 98, 99. They had a salary cap, I think it was 11 million. Parramatta's salary cap was 9. That's how much it exploded. So blokes have gone from blokes who were on $120,000 a year were signing $800,000 contracts. But
and in the
90s. In the 90s. Wow. And so it was extraordinary, and there was a real backlash from the public. Initially, I think it started at how dare they get rid of these, Balmains and Western Suburbs and North Sydneys and South Sydneys and all that. There was the backlash there from fans who had followed the game their whole lives, and the Johnny-come-latelys like the Broncos and the Cowboys and the Warriors are now going, well, we're going to go to this new competition and stuff. So there's a real war there. But at the same time, there was, I think the public pretty quickly got sick of the players as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a real backlash then against the players. And then that fueled the media then, which the media then, it sort of got on steroids at the time. And it became a real feeling in the media, well, if I don't write it, someone else will. So whereas in the past you'd have you go on tour, there'd be an incident in a pub, and there'd be a gentleman's agreement with the media. Well, mate, unless the coppers revolve, we'll all just pretend we didn't know about it, and that's what would happen. After Super League, there was like, well, if I don't write it, they're going to write it. Yeah, well, someone else will write. And then from my point of view, there was a feeling, well, if I don't say anything, and my boss finds out I knew about it and I didn't write it, then I'm going to get my ass kicked.
Yeah.
So, and that was the sort of the beginning of it all, where it all then just become what it is today. So, yeah. So
that's the biggest.
It was massive. It went 3 years, and it was daily. It was a daily story. There's been other ones like they're always the bad ones you remember, right? And again, you asked me to recall the biggest stories I can remember. I can remember the bad stories, right? Which sort of mirrors what happens when people bag us, mate. You guys don't do anything but write, players. You don't do anything but write bad stories. I said to a bloke one day, I said, mate, don't tell me the last good story I wrote. Tell me the last good story you remember I wrote. So even if you've got to go back 5 years to remember it, just tell me, mate. You don't write anything that's good. Mate, I wrote one on Monday. Go and read the one I wrote on Monday. But they don't remember that, so it doesn't stick in your mind.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember when I was doing 360. And one of the clubs came out, the players of the clubs came out, and mate, all they do is write negative. I don't talk to the media, I hate the media. All they do is write negative stuff. I got that day's paper, and I said, right, let's go through it. 27 rugby league stories in the paper, 24 were positive. The 3 that were negative were the ones he was complaining about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's human nature. And so you say to me now, I suffer the same thing. What's the biggest story? I can remember another big one is Julian O'Neill when the Dubbo trip went to the Dubbo trip, and
well, it's kind of like, do you remember where you were when this event happened? It's not. It's generally speaking, it's not a positive event. Yeah. Where were you when 9/11 happened?
Yeah, exactly.
Where were you when Diana died?
Yeah,
both
of which I can remember.
Yeah,
I can tell exactly where I was when I heard both of them.
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's human nature. But again, it comes back to what I said, at the beginning about people and how they perceive things. And, you're always critical. We're not always critical. And there's a difference between criticism and analysis.
Yeah.
But
sometimes you've got to call out things that you feel are wrong.
100%.
Like that happens in sports administration. No one's immune from criticism. It doesn't. It's
Yeah, come and read my emails. I'll show you no one's immune from it. But you know what I mean? And that's the way it goes. And even now, and that's why I can't understand why players put themselves out there on social media. Because you've got to draw more negatives than positives. That's the reality.
Again, this is a perception thing. I look at it and go, well, you wouldn't give everyone your phone number.
Yep, 100%.
Like you'd be guarded of your phone number. Yeah. But you happily open yourself up to anybody and anyone that can get access to a smartphone.
I remember talking to Mick Ennis when he was at Canterbury about social media, and he told me about a player at the club. He didn't name him, but I think I know who it is, but I won't, just so I won't be wrong, I won't say it. But one of the players there was just in the doldrums, and Mick's like, mate, you're okay? What's the matter? And he's like, oh, yeah. What's the matter? Oh, yeah. And eventually he goes, mate, look at this. And someone on Twitter or Instagram or something had bagged him. Mm. And he was all upset about it. And Mick said, what do you care for? And he goes, well, mate, look what he said. Mick said, listen, mate, he says, that bloke was sitting over there in the grandstand and said that to you. You'd say, mate, go and stick it up your ass. Mm. He said, but because he's written it on Twitter, he said, you're upset about it. He said, you're legitimising it.
Yes.
And that's the truth. And that's what I say to, I say to people, so I don't do social media. Right? The last thing I want to do is go and read out how much of a dickhead I am. You know what I mean? Yeah, I've got friends that tell me that. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't need people I don't know. I've got no, role in my life telling me that sort of stuff. And the thing about it though, mate, is, and I say to people, there's a lot of good that comes out. I said, mate, if you go on there, and a lot of them go on there to get a rap about themselves, right? They want to get a rap. You know how good they are. Mate, great game tonight, mate. You killed them, right? But if you legitimise the rap, then you legitimise the criticism. You can't have one without the other. And if you can't handle the criticism, get off it.
Yeah, I agree.
It's such a simple rule, but they just there's an addiction to it now. They can't do it. They want to go on. They want to get the dopamine hit. They want to get mate, great game tonight. You're a legend. You know, mate, you got me home in the multi. You know, heaven forbid when you don't. But
Yeah. Well, death threats come for that.
Yeah.
Jesus, talk about an overreaction. Spoke about the past, moving forward. Where do you see the game going? Obviously, you spoke at the start of the show of you want the game to be the number one football code in Australia. Where do you see the NRL in, let's say, 10 years' time?
I don't know, mate. It depends. I think we've got to get back to that model I spoke about, where we've got to get more people who know the business of football. We've got to start. I think we've got to start growing the game. We've got to start being more strategic. At the moment, there was a period there for a long time, from out of the Super League war, which ended in '98, into the commission, which began in 2010, which were tough years, but it was really just basically hold on and hope type years. Let's just try and get through Super League and such with the scars. I understand that. The commission came in and promised a lot of change, and I bring this up all the time. But the commission's early years were a disaster. They got it. I remember John Grant, and I've said it before, came out, pumped himself on and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got it. We got the $1 billion deal." By the time that deal was over, and I asked them this, and I've never got an answer. I said, "You got $1 billion. You got no money in the bank. You haven't bought an asset with it. You've got less people watching it on TV. You've gone up in memberships. I'll give you a plus there. You've got less sponsorships. But there's no money in the bank. Where did that $1 billion go? What have you done with it?" Can't get an answer. Still can't get an answer. Cannot get an answer what they've done with that $1 billion. The largesse that they carried on with, the amount of money that they just, like they had, and they would never confirm this to me, but I know it's true, and I've since had it confirmed. They had advisors that were in offices down at the entertainment quarters there, who were getting upwards of $20 million a year to just tell the game on things they should be doing. $20 million a year. Now, that's one of the things, first things Vlandis did when he came in and Abdo came in, was they got rid of them. They just said, "Mate, done. You're out." So there's $20 million a year gone. The amount of money they wasted is criminal. It's criminal. They someone there said to me that if there's a sandwich downstairs that costs $25 and there's a sandwich across the road costs $2.50, they'd buy the one downstairs so they didn't have to go across the road. They just didn't care. Money was no object. They put all this money into their digital arm, which was in direct conflict of the two broadcasters, Channel 9 and News Limited, and Fox Sports, who were funding them, in direct contrast to that, and still would not admit to there being any conflict. And finally, again, that they're now being cut right back because they were building a media arm to take away audience from the media who are paying them. Like, where's the business now in that? But these people, we were all told as rugby league people, we were all told they were the smartest people in the room and to trust them. John Grant got up there at the first meeting with all the club chairmen and CEOs, and he said, self-made millionaire, very successful man, right? So let's trust him, knows his stuff. Got up there and said, "We're going to tell you and show you how to make money." And Nick Politis, who went from a car yard in Bondi to being worth $2.1 billion, but still works hard to turn over a profit the Roosters, sat down and thought, this is going to be interesting. Because he knew the beast that was rugby league. But at least now we're just starting, Jimmy, to get some strategic thinking into where the game grows. So the Dolphins is a good sign. It was just a strategic decision. There's got to be an 18 team very quickly. It has to be strategic as well. It can't be a feel good, let's bring back the Bears and play them at North Sydney. Yeah. Right? People say to me, "Mate, I'm from the Central Coast. I grew up there." People say, "Mate, the Bears should be on the Central Coast. Look at all the juniors we got there." I say, no, they shouldn't. Look at all the juniors Illawarra had. Never won a comp. Roosters got no juniors. Can't help winning comps. It's got nothing to do with that. You've got to be strategic where you go. But at least we've got people in there who are now thinking that way, and they've also had enough clear air from all the damage that was done post Super League into the commission era. They've got enough clear air now that they can actually begin to work that way. I just hope that we continue to get the right people on board. Yeah. It's all about the right people. Yeah. In every club, it's about the right people.
I guess rather than us speculate about a conference system, 18, 20 teams, whatever it may be, probably people smarter than us with better foresight would be able to come up with a strategic plan, justify why, stack the odds in their favour of making it making this become a reality, and away we go.
What they've got to do, the big decision for the NRL every time is we've got to find a way to maximise the broadcast revenue. That's what they've got to do. So it doesn't make sense now to bring in another team without a second team to come in as well, because you're not getting an extra game. But so that's why they'll put the skates on. Once the Dolphins get in and get settled, they'll put the skates on to bring an 18th team in, because that gives them an extra game to sell. But they've got to be whether you like it or not, that's got to be the way you go. So if it's going to be a conference system, there's certainly some support for a conference system. Whether you do that, you've got to figure out a way to make it work to sell it as a television product. If it doesn't work that way, there's no point doing it. Now, the obvious conference system is a Sydney conference and an out of Sydney conference, okay? And you do it that way. That brings other problems.
Yeah.
As far as your television audience, because there's a big fear that if you just go back to a Sydney conference, that if Friday night's the Warriors versus the Broncos, you're going to get 5 million people in Sydney just probably won't watch it. Not as closely or not as many as if they're all in one competition. So there's all sorts of little machinations within the thinking that need to be considered, and they need to really figure out. And I don't know how they're going to come up with the answer. It's going to be a tough one. And there's no doubt they'll employ people to do studies, and they'll talk to the broadcasters. They'll do their figures. And there'll probably be a bit of guesswork. They might do a conference system, might work for 3 years, and then they look at it and go, you know what? Yeah, it's not flying. We need to go back. You might go up to 20 teams and let everyone just play each other once. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just have a 19-round competition. But if you can sell that for more money, I don't know what they do, because it's not as many games as they're selling now. Because they sell, I think there's 205 games, I think, a year. Yeah. But look, there's a lot to happen. I don't know where they're going to go. I don't know what the answer should be there with all that. They're just going to do their best, mate.
Yeah, and it comes down to the people, right? As long as if the right people are running the game.
Yeah. That's it. That's all you can do.
You give up. You put your trust in them.
You trust them, and that's what you do. And I'm prepared to do that now. That if previous administrations were saying just trust us, I'd be like, oh, we're in trouble here. But this mob here, and I hope V'landys and Abdo stick around for a bit. I've got faith in what they're doing and what they're thinking. So we just got to wait and see. But I don't know the answer. I don't think anything will happen until I think they'll give Dolphins 2, perhaps 3 years to bed down, because having spoken to the people of the Bears, one of the things I said to them is you can't push your inclusion too quickly if you're going to chase that, because you're going to run the Dolphins parade. You've got to give them time to get settled, and you've got to give them time to feel part of the comp and get their roster
and maximise their exposure and all that sort of stuff.
Before you don't want everyone quickly jumping onto the Bears or the Perth Pirates or whatever.
They're the new team in town now. You've got to.
Yeah, so there's got to be time to give them that opportunity, but then there's got to be the right time. That said, the next broadcast deal doesn't end till the end of 2027, but I don't think that's one thing V'landys has shown. If a team came to him with a proposal, while they should be in the comp in 2026 as the 18th team, I'm sure he'd okay, well, let's go back, and we'll go back to 9 and Fox Sports, and we'll say
we've got an extra game.
What do you think? And
let's upgrade and extend.
Upgrade and extend. So he's shown he's really agile in that area, because at the end of the day, contract's there to protect both interests. That's all it's there for. So if we do the right thing by each other, we can always break it.
Yeah,
it's only necessary when one doesn't do the right thing.
Yeah,
and then you've got to actually go, well, hang on, this is what the paper says, but. until we get to there, it's years away, I think, from happening. I think we've got to wait till at least the Dolphins get settled before we even start to, well, not before we think about it, but before we act on it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure there should be thinking going on now about what their next step is after the Dolphins are settled in.
Final question.
Yeah.
What advice have you got for an ex-player starting off in a career in media? Ask him for a mate.
Mate, I just think, the one thing that I think people respond to is honesty. And look, it's difficult. I think you've got to, the quicker you can move on from being an ex-player and being a valid commentator on the game, the quicker you can do that, the better it works for you, because there's going to come a time where kids watching the game won't remember you played. Yeah. Yeah, you'll be just, who's this old git here? You know, Dad, oh mate, don't worry, he could play. You know what I mean? So what you got to do is you got to be. I think by the time that period comes, you got to. I think every player when they retire has got a grace period where they're on as the ex-player, but that runs out after time. So Matt Johns is not on now because he's an ex-player. Peter Sterling is not on because he's an ex-player. Yeah, even Brad Fittler, he's retired 15 or 18 years ago now. Yeah, there comes a point where if you're not valid as a legitimate commentator, then media will move you on and just get the next guy that's about to retire. And there's been a lot, if you start going back through some of the names, there's been a lot that they come in, they do 2 or 3 years of it, and then they get shuffled along. We tend to forget them. And they have to go and find another way to do it, but there's been a stack of them. Yeah,
it's funny that, because it reminds me of like whenever I would watch soccer or football back home, and my dad would be like, we'd see a manager, we could play him, son.
Yeah.
I'd be like, he played.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, he was.
Yeah.
You know, but I was just a kid, so I had no exposure to him as a player.
Yeah.
All I ever viewed him was no, he's a manager.
Yeah.
You know, that comes back to that perspective thing. Like, he saw them as players going into coaching or management.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the same with pundits as well. Like, I just saw them as pundits. I didn't see them as ex-players, and the ones that were good, they lasted. Yeah,
they last, and that's it. You know, and beyond that, mate, you just, as much truth as you can tell, you tell. Yeah. You know, I know you can't tell everything all the time, but just tell what you know to be true, and as much as you can tell that's true, and don't be swayed from what people think.
No doubt. Well,
I don't think you ever would be.
No, not really. Not really. Well, mate, I just want to say thank you for joining us on the buy round. I really appreciate you. I've admired you for a long time. There's one thing that I didn't mention that I really think I should is your level of intelligence. I think it speaks volumes, and that's a big reason why you are who you are, and why you maintain your position.
I appreciate it.
You know, it's not just. I think it's important for people to realise it's not just the 3 hours that we see, or whenever you do other things. It's not just that. There's more to it. There's a huge care factor of the game, and there's an incredibly high level of intelligence which helps you formulate a point of view or an argument which comes across brilliantly on TV. And that's why so many people tune in, and that's why 360 is where it is because you're one of the mainstays of the show. So again, thank you for joining us on the buy round.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you.
All good.
Do you want me to play a song?
He went home to get it.